Two.
Hello, dear Polaris audience. Welcome to our 10th episode about an article that Alexander wrote, and it delineates the distinction between the ideas of the West, or whatever this collective is that we call the West, versus let's say a multipolar world. And the Eurasian idea, the idea that Russia is in its own respect a geopolitical entity with its own historical path and its own narratives and its own identities and its own interests. The article will be linked to in the description of this video, but in general, it lays out the case that let's say the Eurasianist world is more of a tradition-based world as opposed to the materialist liberal paradigm of the West. So joining us for this discussion tonight will be, of course, Alexander, who wrote this fine article, Hans Vogel from Italy, Charles Daly from Texas, and Michael. I always have to guess where you are, so I'm just going to say Michael is joining us also. So, which one of you gentlemen would like to make his first comments on Alexander's article?
I formulated a few questions. I could ask one of the questions
Yeah,
with
sure.
a couple of sub questions first, if you like.
Go ahead, Charles.
Okay. Uh, so I guess sort of as a meta question, we're talking about this struggle between two forces, in which the current conflict is one manifestation of this age-long struggle. And my first question is the current aggression against Iran, Alexander, in your opinion, just a giant blood sacrifice? This may seem a little bit off the topic, but would you say that if the Iran-United States war is part of an age-long struggle, was Jesus of Nazareth resented and hated because he put an end to blood sacrifice? Is this all essentially about something in the blood and sacrificing blood, and not so much about territory or about political control of something? These Satano-Globalists, as you call them, do they take sustenance from energy created by means of mass blood sacrifice? And are mass blood sacrifices required on a regular basis for these people or entities, whatever you like to call them, these Satano-Globalists? Um, and why is it that people today generally think that blood sacrifice is a thing of the past, whenever throughout history it's existed around the world in many places for most of history, and perhaps for all of history? Maybe that's too many questions at once, but that's what I'd like to ask.
Mhm. Well, Alexander, I think you have your work cut out for you.
Well, yes, thank you, Caesar, for introducing, and also Charles for his question. Of course, um, the article was not so much about one struggle, as well as a larger struggle that traditionalists see between forces of light and forces of dark. From a traditionalist perspective, everything that's happening today fits into a larger pattern, into a cosmological picture. And Charles's question pinpoints to one of the core mechanisms of this process that's going on, this light versus dark battle, as traditionalists would see it. The blood sacrifice, of course, refers to rejuvenation, right? It's part of a cycle. So blood is shed when a child is born. Blood is shed when a man's life is ended in violence. Blood is shed by a woman to be fertile at all, to be able to reproduce at all. And blood is what is consumed during the life cycle of people in one way or another, be it through mother's milk, be it through conscious consumption, or in a ritual sense. So, in a very specific ritual sense as well. So, for example, Catholic sacrifice is, of course, well known, which is a hypothesis of the older blood sacrifices that took place in the temple. But of course, as Charles pointed out, it's a universal phenomenon that blood is shed in all kinds of cultures for all kinds of ritual purposes. Now, his question also raised the point. So, is the current blood sacrifice to be understood as a deliberate act? I mean, that's how I read the question. So, is there a program behind it? I would say that not the program is not even needed. It's just a mechanism, like blood, like the blood cycle sustains life. Also, blood cycle sustains human history. Of course, as there are more human beings, the scale on which blood sacrifice will take place is only to expect it to grow, the bloodbath being the ultimate form of it. And I think that there is a slight part of it that can be called deliberate, that can be called programmed, that can be called steered. And I think that is, of course, at the highest levels of world governance, because such a thing is being aspired to by some people. This is taking place behind the screens. It's not visible for people, but definitely it's a part of certain people's world views. People that want to rule the world in one sense or another. That can also be a religious authority. So the Catholic Church saw its task in spreading access to the Eucharist, to the blood sacrifice ritual to all the world. Similarly, in the Muslim tradition, there is also blood sacrifice cycle of it that takes place. And of course, there is the third Abrahamic religion that we are familiar with, the Judaic tradition, in which blood sacrifice was halted by force, exactly like Charles pointed out. So there was a big seizure, a big divide in history, separating the earlier Abrahamic tradition from the later, by the blood sacrifice of Jesus. Of course, the blood sacrifice of Jesus meant that afterwards the temple fell, no blood sacrifice was possible anymore in that context. And also it became, at least as the Christians see it, sacrilegious to continue in blood sacrifices in a literal sense. So to metamorphosis of wine into hypostasis of the blood sacrifice into wine and bread was allowed, but not a continuation of the blood cycle as such. Of course, this is not agreed upon by other religious traditions in the Abrahamic sense. So the Islamic and Judaic traditions still insist that this is a part of the ritual cycle as well. So the force element here, I think, is the force by which the ritual has been stopped by religious authority. I think it does inform this moment. So the fact that Judaism was not able to continue its blood sacrifices definitely propels the current agenda that's taking place in the Middle East, the rebuilding of the temple. So the enabling of the blood sacrifice there again is, of course, something that is aspired to consciously, unconsciously, explicitly, and implicitly by people very high up in the food chain of power. And I think that this, of course, also creates automatically a clash with any force opposing it, because to allow this temple to be rebuilt would be, from a point of view of the other Abrahamic traditions and others actually as well, the ultimate sacrilege. It would actually herald the kingdom of the Antichrist. So my article is dedicated to a larger concept, if you can deduce it from it, which is called victory. So victory in the old sense of the word, victory that is that takes people out of the sacrifice cycle. So we are talking here about the sacrifice cycle in the human level, the birth cycle, the death cycle. We are talking about the blood cycle on the macro historical level. But of course, there is something higher than that, and that is the breaking of the cycle and the breaking of the cosmic cycle in this sense, very specifically. So from a traditionalist point of view, the ultimate victory is the breaking of this cycle. It is the cycle being stopped by a force that is actually outside of the human, of direct human interference. And this greater force heralds in a timeless time. That's a little bit strange to say, but in golden age is exactly that. It's an eternity principle in which a common human team does not exist, and which also the sacrifice in the blood cycle stores. I mean, that's my answer so far to a quite complicated question.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Alexander. So, Charles, you have any more straight off the cuff?
I think that, Alexander made the point again that what Jesus of Nazareth did was sort of break the cycle of relying on blood sacrifice by a substitutionary act where you have a representation of blood in place of actual blood, or a representation of death after his death in place of actual death. And so I would ask, how many people or what percentage of the world do you think is aware of the fact of the difference between Christianity and Judaism, in the sense that in Christianity, everything is based upon self-sacrifice. Jesus sacrificed himself. In Judaism, it's based upon sacrifice of other beings. You don't find many, if any, instances of self-sacrifice in the Old Testament, in the Torah. But the New Testament revolves around self-sacrifice. The sacrifice in the Old Testament or the Torah is sacrifice of other beings for God or to God. And I just wonder, is that something that maybe this is beyond the purview of the talk, but is that part of the illusion or the mirage created by the Satano-Globalists to make people focus on sacrificing others rather than giving themselves into sacrifice, presenting themselves?
Well, this is, of course, treading territory that's properly called spiritual. The question of sacrifice versus self-sacrifice versus sacrificing others. Definitely, we can say that what is below is above, what is above is below. They are reflecting of each other. So the upper world has its reflections of the lower world. From a traditionalist point of view, I'm speaking now, that same thing is true from a microcosmic point of view. There are phenomena and processes mirrored in the macro world. So the sacrifice that takes place when Jesus lays down his life, it's an active word, lays down his life. So he put it down. It is an active word. Yeah, so you're correct. It's a self-sacrifice. But of course, that's not true from the point of view of his opponents. So the people that put him to death were of the view that they were the ones that are king, and they did not see it as a sacrifice. They denied the sacred act as such. That's only from a Christian point of view. The sacrifice is a sacrifice. And I think here this is important because that's a question of perspective. So what perspective here is the crucial question. And I think that the choice of perception of the perception point, so what point of view we choose here, is as important as the reality that once was more than 2,000 years ago. So I think that perception here, choice, should be understood not only in the sense of intellectual understanding, moral understanding, ethical understanding, but in a very direct way. So the choice that you make can also be a choice of belief as an act of belief. So the act of belief itself is capable of stopping the cycle. The cosmic cycle can be stopped by an act of faith. As is written in the Bible, anybody that would truly believe, Jesus says, and his belief is only the size of a little grain, this suffices for that person to have the power to tell a mountain to put himself into the sea. So perception here is important, and the decision to perceive in a certain way is crucial. I think this is probably the most important principle here to underline. It's not so much the reality of the sacrifice that we are referring to, or the self-sacrifice. It is the perception of the person, of the story, of the moment, and the reenactment in faith. I think this is the crucial point here. That's how I would answer that.
All right. So, Michael, do you have any remarks, questions, or otherwise, deep things of your soul that you would like to share with us about Alexander's article?
Not sure whether I have many deep things of my soul to share about it, but I did find the article very interesting. I think that the battle lines are correctly sketched out as far as I can see. I think the parties that Alexander distinguishes as opponents are, I think, are correctly identified. I also agree with the characterization of the West as Satano-Globalist. I think that sums it up very well. It's also interesting that most traditionally Christian countries, which might, from an ideological point of view, be expected on the other side, are actually part of this Anglo-Zionist empire, right? So it is the other side that stands up for humanity in a way. Now, a question that came to my mind is there really some sort of unifying principle on the other side than simply the antagonism to the Anglo-Zionists? Is it not that the Anglo-Zionist empire, through its sheer force, simply has compelled the others to form an alliance of purpose, not so much of spirit, but simply one of purpose? Do, for example, countries such as Iran and China, do they have very much in common in terms of philosophical outlook, tradition, history, and so on and so forth? I think there's essentially just simply standing up for themselves, for their own independence, and for throwing off the shackles and the threat that the Anglo-Zionist empire poses to them. So I'm not convinced that the entirety of the forces arrayed against the Anglo-Zionist empire can really be neatly subsumed under one sort of philosophical principle or idea.
Yeah, I think I would agree on that, because if there was some sort of philosophical underpinning to the unification of these contra-Western societies, we would see more countries coming to the aid of Lebanon, of Iran, and other countries that are being, bombed to smithereens by the Western alliances. So even if China has actually guaranteed Iran its help in the past, we see that they are choosing their own. How do you say it? In the Netherlands, we say their eggs in their basket or something. I'm looking for the. Well, they're looking out for their own. For number one, let's just keep it at that. And yeah, I think that's a really pertinent question. So, Alexander, would you like to answer that?
Well, of course, here Michael is completely right. There are many actors, and all of these are motivated by their own histories, their own situation, their own priorities, their own plans, their own outlooks. There is no unifying geopolitical principle here. Multipolarity is just a word. It's just a word to describe something that doesn't really exist, but that stands opposed, that indicates a whole that stands opposed to something that is unified, namely what I call Satano-Globalism, which, of course, now includes, let's occupied territory, mostly the entire West. So this is important. But I would like to point to the power of the Anglo-Zionist plot, the Satano-Globalist order, to create an anti-force. So let's go back to the point that Charles Daly brought up quite accurately. The sacrifice of Jesus as an example. Okay, so we have a lot of students that were witnessing the crucifixion. a lot of bystanders, as far as the story goes, a lot of authorities, religious and worldly, foreigners, including Romans, and then there were a lot of incidental bystanders. So big crowds who were witnessing this execution, and that was, of course, a prolonged process. It was not an easy spectacle to watch. And all of these actors had their own background, their own perspective, their own view, their own ideas, and they were not unified. Even Jesus' supposed and so-called students escaped. They fled and they turned their backs as quickly as possible on the process to escape ramifications for themselves. Only a few people stayed behind, including family and one young student, John, 16 years old at that time. So, but these people, they were just commiserating at the feet of the cross. All the others were not unified in their response. But the action that took place eventually forced everybody to unify. So, a mere 3.5 decades later, Jerusalem was besieged by the Romans, and the Romans forced all the people in the city to make a choice. They had a choice. The generals let them go if they wanted to do that, to stop fighting. But most of them chose not to, and they continued to fight. And after that, it's rumored the city was razed to the ground, and the survivors were all sold off as slaves, and many of them were crucified around the city in a big circle. So, what happened on that day, the crucifixion of Jesus, and I'm saying this from a non-Christian point of view, I'm just describing the history as it is related. This choice moment that took place in the year 33, according to the common dating, forced people into a response. I would suggest that the same can happen here. So the sheer scale of the crimes, the sheer implication of the crimes, the repercussions of the crimes, and the depth of depravity of what is happening can force people into a response. It can unify people. So, some centuries later, after the raising of the temple, there was a Christian world, there was a Christian church, and it still exists, of course. And this was the eventual response. Now, if we take the Satano-Globalists at their own program, we are looking at their program and its eschatological implications, then of course we can expect something similar to happen. So, if this is an eschatologically meant process, so it is intended to have eschatological effects, then we can also predict that the response into which all the different observing actors, including the countries that are supporting Iran or not supporting Iran, that are opposed to it or not opposed to it, these countries, whatever is their response, eventually they will be reacting to what they are seeing. First in Iran and later in other examples, because of course this war is not finished. If Iran is defeated, as it might very well be, or is defeated, this process does not end until the Satano-Globalist project is completed. So all the bystanders will be forced into a role and into choices. I think this is an enforced choice which eventually will be made. That will be my answer. Sorry for keeping this on.
Yes, thank you very much. So Hans, we haven't heard from you. I would like to hear your perspective on the case laid out by Alexander.
Well, thank you very much for the article. I really liked it. And I also like the question of that Michael posed. I had a question more or less in the same direction, but now I can go a bit further. Because, well, I'm not a computer expert, and I think Michael is, and maybe you are, Sietse too. But correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I've been told is that computers basically work on a binary system. Everything is an O, a 0, or a 1, right? Everything is either this or that. It's totally binary. And the West, or the Satano-Globalist elite is inverting everything. That is the empire of lies. So everything they say is the opposite. They talk about our democracy, it's not a democracy. They talk about this, about peace, which is not peace. Everything, every word they use is basically means the opposite, essentially. That's Satanism. Okay, so the opposite of what's good is bad, and bad makes bad is good, and good is bad. This sort of thing. Well, you cannot function like that if everything you say and do is the other way around. There comes a point where you cannot sustain the system. So I would say that the Satano-Globalist system, by its structure and its own philosophy, and by the way it's running the world, or the Anglo-Zionist empire, cannot survive for much longer. I think we're living in a sort of crisis in this sense. So do you agree with this, or do you think I'm talking rubbish, Alexander, or anybody else?
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yes, Alexander, yes.
I understand your point. Look, this is, of course, not a very easy question, because we are talking about an eschatological perspective here. So the Satano-Globalist project is not just a geopolitical empire-building project. It has an eschatological aspect. And eschatology carries in itself, of course, a force that doesn't need sustainability. It doesn't need to be sustained. It needs to reach an end goal, an end state. That is what is being aimed at. And I think at the moment that has been achieved, the project has succeeded. In a certain sense, and that sounds a little bit contradictory, but the Satano-Globalist project aims at something not dissimilar to the Golden Age. So the Golden Age, from a traditionalist perspective, is an absolute good. And of course, the end state approach by the Satano-Globalist elite is an absolute evil. But they're related in the sense that they are both timeless. So they aim for a state that does not need to be sustainable, because an end state has been reached, an equilibrium has been reached, positive or negative. And I think looking at the Satano-Globalist project as we are seeing it now, for example, the takedown of the world economy, the forcing of countries to extreme measures, extreme responses, the culling of the mass culling of populations. These things in themselves are what is solved, I think, by the Satano-Globalist powers. So what they are doing is what they wish for. So the end state is suffering. The end state is only it should be enlarged in scale. And I think here the sustainability is not a question that really needs to be answered at the moment that the ultimate end state has been reached. So let's say total suffering is imposed, the necropolitical project is complete. Nothing else needs to be done. I think because you're talking about the binary situation of the zero, because that's what we're talking about, the elimination of the human race probably included, is the end stage. And at that point, I like to remind people that this also has, of course, a reflection in the biblical scriptures, to which also the Satano-Globalists refer. So their eschatological perspective is colored by the Christian tradition and by the Judaic tradition and the Islamic tradition. They definitely refer to it in many ways. And there it says, in the book of Revelation, it says, there will be an earth that is empty, that is without people, that is ash, an ash world. So, of course, from a Christian perspective, then there is still the heavenly Jerusalem, but that's not an earthly place. So I think the eschatological perspective here is the most important to answer your question. We are not here in the realm of realpolitik or geopolitical equations. That's how I would answer it.
Okay.
Right.
So
So
I think
yes, Michael.
Sorry.
Michael. Yes. No, go ahead, Michael.
But I think we cannot escape real politics, even if we wish to. I think that this dystopian end state which you sketch out, I think it is also the weakness of the Satano-Globalists, right? I mean, they have imposed an agenda of misery on the part of the world that they dominate. And everybody who manages to break free, every society, every country that manages to break free can actually show simply by living a sane life and by creating wealth and even abundance, as for example China is doing, as even Russia is on the way of doing. They can actually expose the Satano-Globalist social order for what it is. I mean, in all its nakedness. It's another point that I want to make is you allude to it also in your piece, right? I mean, Russia has actually been undergoing tremendous pain in the early 20th century. It is really quite miraculous that Russia, of all places, is at the forefront of the fight against Satano-Globalists. I mean, it is just nothing short of miraculous that they have managed to liberate themselves in this way and really found their way back to their own roots, to their own cultural identity, national identity, and to also, at least that's the way it appears to me from the outside. I've never been to Russia, but my sense is that there's also a strong sense right now of national unity and solidarity that is probably stronger than it has been in a long time. And it seems that also in Iran, for example, you see under this threat, under this assault from the Satano-Globalists, you see the people really rallying and unifying and really finding a common purpose. And it is really quite remarkable that Russia has been able to do that. And I think that really should be very ominous to the entire project of the Satano-Globalists, so that even a country that they had managed to destroy so thoroughly and abuse so thoroughly really has found the strength to come back, to rally together, and to take its place in the forefront of this battle to defeat the Satano-Globalists.
But I'm just being plagued by the idea that I'm just more pessimistic about this, and I think that when we look at countries like Russia, which appear outwardly to be sort of this bastion of tradition, but they suffer from all the ailments that Western countries do. They have enormous divorce rates. They have very low birth rates. They are basically just as capitalist as the West is. When you look at the major cities, with the decline or the elimination of the aristocracy and after the Russian Revolution, there is no old money anymore with a vested interest to keep any sort of Russian identity alive. It's all Louis Vuitton and Bugattis and Ferraris and expensive, designer goods. Even though there is, of course, an abundance of traditional architecture, it just appears to me to be just a veneer. If you look at, the financial districts of all these major cities, it's all the same sterile glass and steel buildings that ooze out the evil of large money power and capitalism. And, I just hate to be the party pooper every time, but why is it that there's a very influential rabbi that drinks coffee in the morning with Putin and in the afternoon with Zelensky? These things, why is Chabad so in the forefront in all of these things? And are these countries, is Russia not being made powerful to keep all of these conflicts going? We have seen the same arguments that have been made about the Third Reich. They have been made powerful by the Jews so the conflict could emerge. And is this not a strategy that the Satano-Globalists employ all the time? And I've been looking hard to find a country in the world that has actually remained outwardly tradition, but also inwardly traditional. And I think these have all been infected. If you look at Saudi Arabia, which is supposed to be the heartland of Islamic culture, right? There you have Mecca, but most of the ancient sites around Mecca have been bulldozed flat, and they have been replaced by luxury hotels, by shopping malls, by Louis Vuitton stores, by enormous towers of which the Kaaba can only stand in its shadows. The sacredness has been completely been demolished, and everywhere you look, it has been replaced by this filthy, modernistic, capitalist poison. And China is to me just another example. I mean, can we really be impressed with all these neon lighted cities full of entertainment and glitter and gleam? And is it not just, outward show over a dead society? I mean, Japan is another great example. Used to be very traditional, but it's destroying itself with low birth rates and capitalist influence. So I'm in general way more pessimistic about it. I think that the Satano-Globalists have been far more successful than we are willing to admit. And so what I take away from Alexander's piece is that it's really a battle between spirituality and materialism, and that we are living in eschatological times, and we are probably watching the end of a cycle. And what is coming after that, the end state, we don't really know. But I think that the influence of these forces is much more complete than we are willing to admit. So on that happy note, would like anyone like make some more comments?
I would like to say something.
Yes, Jones.
Just to put this in some historical context, we're sort of begging the question of what Satano-Globalists are, who they are exactly. And the American professor of history, Carroll Quigley, infamously wrote a book entitled Tragedy and Hope, in which he discusses the Anglo-American Empire. And he discusses it in other works as well. And the Anglo-American Empire goes back to the late 1800s with a lot of Brits who had a certain vision of what the world should look like based upon expanding what they thought was enlightenment, the enlightenment that was possessed primarily by Englishmen and certain Americans. So my question in the context of this term Satano-Globalist is, are the Satano-Globalists an extension of Quigley's Anglo-American Empire, which goes back at least to the early 1900s, maybe the late 1800s?
Well,
For Alexander.
I would like to say something first about that, because here again, well, perhaps I'm a bit obsessed, but the Jews have very, very successfully integrated them into the English nobility. And there are a few very interesting books about this, because these kings from Edward is it Edward the Conqueror, William the Conqueror, from 1066 onwards, they were all in desperate need of money to build their empire and have large militaries, of which, of course, they loaned money from people who had the money, and which were these people, of course, these famous Rothschild-like families. And in order for these kings to have access to this money, they actually they wanted mating rights with these families. This is actually quite well documented. So is it so that Satano-Globalists are Jews? I don't know if you can make that simple a statement, but there is a group, perhaps masquerading as Jews, which are very much at the center of the Satano-Globalist ideas. And you have to also take into consideration, when we are talking about the Bible, for instance, that Christianity is fundamentally about an afterlife. You need to have a moral life in acceptance of God and Jesus Christ to have access to an afterlife. But Jews who follow the Torah and the Talmud are not concerned with an afterlife at all. They are concerned with a very sumptuous and rich life on this earth. And they worship the ruler of this earth. And I think the Bible is quite clear that God is in fact not the ruler of this earth, but it is Satan, or at least some sort of entity that is not God. And therefore, I think that your remarks about Jesus are actually quite fitting to this discussion, because I think the answer to a lot of these questions lies in the main scriptures of these large Abrahamic religions, and it's also very
well. Since Satan is the prince of this,
yeah.
I was going to say, since Satan is the prince of this world, you could argue that the Satano-Globalist empire has always existed, and it's only recently that it's become more manifest to more people. That it's nothing new. The entire age has been ruled by this empire to some degree or another.
Yes.
You know, and if you look at the Hindu idea of the different ages of the world, we've been in a dark age for 6,000 years. So that's all of what most historians think is recorded history.
Yes.
Going back to the Sumerians and before.
Yes. Exactly.
But I wonder if Alexander has any comments concerning my question about Carol Quigley.
And you mean about the term Satano-Globalist? Okay. Definitely we can all agree on it that whatever we are facing here, the force of evil that is obviously and clearly consuming much of the world and has the political power in the West. This complex has been called many names. Another good one, I think, is ZOC. It's a nice good word. From the 70s, 60s, Zionist occupation government, because it reflects the occupation status of the West. So I like it for that reason. But Satano-Globalist does very well. The term consists of two parts. So Satana, which of course refers to the adversary of humankind, of Adam and Eve at the Last Judgment. And globalist, of course, means that the time has come for the empire of Satan to rule the whole world, not just a part of it, or not just individual people's hearts. So I think we can define it in that way. We can also agree that a shape-shifting historical pattern can be distinguished here. So whatever is ruling us has shape-shifted over the years. There is a certain overlap between certain genealogical lines and power lines. That's also crystal clear. But more important is that, of course, this shape-shifting entity is served by confusion. So one of the best ways not to be defeated by your enemy is to be unseen by your enemy. So the moment that you cannot be distinguished from the background, the moment that you shape-shift enough, you have already reached half of your goal. And I think the discussions that have been had in the dissident right, in which we all have had our share, especially for active consumers and producers, these discourses about the identity of this hostile elite, this wannabe world rulers, the shape-shifting nature of them has precluded a definite answer. And I think that's exactly what they want. And I think the best answer here is to answer it again in the words of the Bible, because actually that's quite a good source. By their fruits you shall know them. So evil does, and then you can know who is doing it. I think that is the most important part of it. And I think clearly responsibility is not something that these forces want to take upon themselves. It is exactly like what theologians always say. Satan whispers in people's ears and makes them do things. It is very interesting that the rulers of the West are the political class, the people that we are seeing on television and on the internet. These people are most obviously not the ones that are ruling us. They are just taking orders, they're just faces, they're just portraits on the wall. And I think this is very important, the shape-shifting nature of the elite and the fact that they are hiding. And I think the Satano-Globalist word, what Charles asked about, is not really very important You can probably even boil it down to a much more simple proposition, that's simply to call it for what it is in the original sense of the word. In the original human condition, there was only one human, that's called Adam, and there was only one adversary, it's Satan. Yes, now there are billions of us, but the situation is not really different. There's still each human which has still this battle going on in his heart and his mind, and there's still one adversary. And I think that this ultimately is also what this globalist elite so it is shape-shifting sufficiently to make everybody internalize this struggle and not being able to focus his attention on outward forces. Everybody has to look inside himself, starts to doubt himself, is being manipulated. I think this is a very big part of the success of the Satano-Globalist elite. So instead of just keeping to tradition, which gives defense mechanisms against this Satano-Globalist project, people have descended into individualism and have been pretending that they themselves can find the answer, which of course is not true. No human stands justified in front of his maker. That's how I would answer it.
May I ask a brief follow-up to that?
Sure, Charles, go ahead.
This a biblical question. If they are satanic by definition, and Christians identify the serpent of Eden as Satan, then do these Satano-Globalists consciously identify with the, let's say, the personality of the serpent of Eden? And because of that, is there a modus operandi, a search for forbidden knowledge or a secret knowledge that they do not want others to have?
Well, so if you want to belong to a power group, you need to be initiated. So if you want to be an academic, you need to take a doctorate. If you want to be an officer in the army, you have to take an oath. If you want to be in the government, you have to also go through a procedure. So yes, there is an initiation, graduation cycle here, I'm sure. Of course, the Freemasonry is a simple example of it. So it's a layered organization with circles of initiation. But of course, it's like the onion. The heart is empty. It's just layers and layers and layers and layers. And if you go to the end, there's nothing left. So I think the growth principle is important here. You should ask yourself around what does this do these powers elite grow? How did they grow? And where do they get their power? And I think that is in the seed. So the seed grows into the onion. But the power of this seed has been long in the making. So it is also another biblical project. Now we are just talking about the Bible in any case. So it's said that at the end of the world there will be a harvest. So things are growing, right? Things are progressing as human history progresses. There are all kinds of edifices being erected, peoples that are developing, ideas that are developing, and power structures that are developing. Eventually, yes, there will be an end result, but the kernel, the seed of these projects is very, very old. And I think what you're asking is how do they identify, how do the power structures identify with the origin? I think they cannot identify with it because it is like asking, does the human will himself into being? No, we are the product of history, very differently from our parents. I think similarly, the power elite has been willed into existence, but not by itself. And they do not really know what propels them. They are following a power structure, that's obvious. And they're getting rewards for this, that's also obvious. But I think that the ultimate end state eludes them. They do not know what is the end state. Although there are people probably among them who have had some kind of vision, because I believe that if the good force can give you vision, also the evil force can do that. And they might be tempted by that vision. But I think we should never forget that it's written in all the Holy Scriptures, as a matter of fact, the Satan, or whoever we call them, Iblis, whatever, he is the father of lies. So whatever has been promised is not automatically what you get in the end. This is a non-human force. We should not forget that. So we are talking here about a non-human force that has not a good attitude towards the creation of the human that we can also deduce from many scriptures. So that the fact that a human would be rewarded by this non-human force for helping him to destroy other humans, I think that is a very unlikely scenario. So whatever these Satano-Globalist elites believe, they are certainly tricked, and they certainly not receive the thing that they are looking for. That's how I would answer it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I think the archetype of the mastermind is captivating to many people, and so there's this presumption that there is an organizing force behind everything that's just genius, and it's hard for normal people to approach. Maybe there's nothing of the kind.
Well, isn't it not interesting to make a little bit of a sidestep when we are talking about the Bible and Jesus? There are, of course, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, and these are a very important find within the Christian literature, and because they contradict the Bible in many ways. And these are scriptures that have been unearthed from the desert. I forgot exactly where. It contains like the Gospel of Thomas and stuff, but in these scriptures, Jesus talks about non-human forces called archons, which thrive off human suffering. That's basically their food. The energy that is created by human suffering is their food, and it is ultimately, this world is like a karma trap, and when you die, your soul stays here, gets incarnated to be harvested again, all your suffering. So that's, of course, sounds like an extremely wild idea. And it is also the idea that a guy like David Icke promotes, for instance, that like he's like the Hulk of conspiracy theories. He's the Uberman of conspiracies, but he has been proven right in many occasions. And I think it is time to not directly acknowledge such a possibility, but at least think about, why is it that humans have created such misery for themselves for all their existence? Is that something that is truly innate to the human condition, or is there something that benefits from it?
And by the way, I would like to come back to something that Michael said. He talked about how amazing it is that it was Russia that is at the forefront of the anti-globalist crusade, as I have called it in my article. And I think he is right in pointing that out. It is quite an amazing turnaround. I would even use the biblical analogy. So there was a man called Saul, and he persecuted the early church, right? Probably he was also involved in the process condemning to death the first martyr, St. Stephen. So Saul became later the Apostle Paul, right? He had a come to Jesus moment, literally, on the road to Damascus, and he was struck with blindness, right? So we can certainly say that the Soviet Empire was an absolute evil. I think that most historians and most of our viewers and most of anybody that has really read into the material will confirm that. That does not mean that each single thing that happened in the Soviet Union was bad. It just means that in its creation, an amount of evil was done that was not paralleled in amount and in intensity anywhere in the world for a very long time. So it was an evil empire. And it persecuted literally Christianity, by the way, also other religions, and in a very drastic and sadistic way. And this same nation, the Russian nation that carried that experience, has become the vehicle of what we could call as a kind of a neo-Christian crusade, albeit a weak one probably, and that's currently taking place on the new Eastern Front, so in the Ukraine. I think Michael is pointing quite rightly to the remarkable nature of this event, and I think that if this what happened to Saul changing into Paul is happening, we can see that reflected in what is happening to Russia. That does not automatically bode well for Russia. Russia might very well end up like Paul. Paul was executed, right? He paid the ultimate price. But he did so after literally building the church, right? It's the real founder of the Christian church as a worldly edifice. It was St. Paul. And I think what Michael said here, I find that quite good view of it. I just wanted to add that, sorry.
All right. So we've been at it for over an hour. If there's anybody who would like a closing statement or one last question, then please do so. Otherwise,
I could ask one further question, but
yes,
it
Charles,
could start us off in a different direction, which is a question I plan to ask Alexander. A broader question. Would the Islamization of Europe be any better than it's controlled by what you call the Satano-Globalist empire of lies? And are the forces desiring Islam to conquer the world in league with the Satano-Globalists?
Okay. That depends on how you define Judaism, how you define Christianity, and how you define Islam in the modern world. As far as I can see, the forms of Islam that are currently still holding ideological grip, religious grip, institutional grip over people in this world, are largely fallen to such a low level and have degraded to such an extent that they are not much better than, for example, the Catholic Church. It has become an inversion of original ideas, original practices, original intentions. It has become a barrier force in many sense that stands directly opposed to its origins. So, from the point of view of what is now Islam and what is now Christianity, what is now Judaism, none of these three things would be a good. They would, from a traditionalist perspective, in fact, be possessed entities in need of an exorcism. So they are evil forces that once were good but have become perverted by power structures and by all kinds of historical processes. So no, the answer to your question would be if what is now called Islam, let's say the Wahhabi Saudi variant of it, with rich people sitting in big cars and secretly stoning people in the desert if they can get away with it and cutting off heads of infidels, if that would be the Islam that would have to come to Europe, then the destruction of Islam would be, from a traditionalist point of view, an imminently desirable goal.
All right. Really nice answer,
Thanks.
Alexander. Well, on that banger, I think we should conclude this episode, and we shall all wish you a very welcome for the next episode, of course, which we will be releasing in 2 weeks' time. And thank you all for watching, and have a good time. See you next time.